Welcome to another episode of AI 10X brought to you by 10 Leaves.
Thanks for having me back.
So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine an algorithm, right, actually accepting a Nobel Prize.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, just picture it. There are no hands to, like, hold the gold medal, no speech to give at the banquet, just, lines of code being recognized for a scientific breakthrough that literally no human mind could have ever achieved on its own.
A pretty wild image.
It is. And today, for you listening, we're diving into excerpts from a fascinating source called The Rise of Nobel Prize Machines. And while our mission for this deep dive is to really explore this paradigm-shifting question. Can artificial intelligence accelerate scientific breakthroughs to the point of, making discoveries entirely on its own?
Right.
Like, are we looking at a future where the machine doesn't just help the scientist, but actually is the scientist?
Yeah, and I mean, it is a massive shift in how we even define the pursuit of knowledge in the first place.
Oh.
Because at its core, if you strip away all the bubbling beakers and the lab coat.
The cinematic version of science.
Exactly, the cinematic version. If you take away the physical experiments, science is fundamentally an exercise in data analysis. It really is.
Right.
It's just the process of observing the universe, collecting unfathomable amounts of information about how it behaves, and then just trying to find the underlying rules.
Just looking for the patterns.
Exactly. And when you frame science as a colossal computational problem, it sets up the exact foundation for why AI is so perfectly suited for this field. I mean, AI is built from the ground up to process information at a scale and a dimensionality that we as humans simply cannot comprehend.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because going from this broad premise of AI analyzing data to the actual mechanism of how it makes scientific discoveries, I mean, that requires a real shift in perspective for most of us.
It really does, yeah.
Because the source highlights AI's ability to analyze massive data sets and uncover patterns that humans simply miss. And to help you visualize this at home, let's just move past that old cliche of finding a needle in a haystack.
Right, that's way too small a scale.
Way too small. Imagine walking into a massive physical library. I'm talking millions of books, every scientific journal, every experiment ever run, all just sitting on these shelves.
Just endless aisles of data.
Exactly. Now, a human researcher, brilliant as they might be, reads one book at a time, right? Looking for relevant information. It would take lifetimes.
Multiple lifetimes.
But an AI doesn't just, read books faster. It's like an entity reading every single book in that library simultaneously.
All at once.
Right. And realizing that, every time a character named John appears in a sci-fi novel on the first floor, it inexplicably reigns in a romance novel 3 aisles over.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It just finds these impossible, invisible correlations across massive gulfs of information.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that you are touching on the absolute limits of human cognition. I mean, the reality of what the AI is doing is profound because it operates completely outside the boundaries of our biological hardware.
All brain power, basically.
Aye. Cognitive science tells us that a human being can hold maybe 5 to 7 distinct pieces of information in our working memory at any given time.
Oh, wow. Just 5 to 7.
Yeah, like a phone number.
Yeah.
That's about our limit for holding active variables.
Yep.
So we are, by necessity, hyper-specialized. A biologist looks at biological data. A meteorologist looks at weather data.
Right.
But nature doesn't operate in neat little academic silos. Everything in the universe is interconnected.
Yeah, the universe doesn't know it's supposed to be separated into university apartments.
Precisely. It doesn't care about our filing system. An AI system isn't constrained by a human's limited working memory. It can look at a data set of ocean temperatures and a data set of global shipping routes and migratory bird patterns all at exactly the same time.
It's holding millions of variables instead of 7.
Exactly. It maps those millions of data points in a multidimensional space that we mathematically cannot visualize in our three-dimensional reality.
That is just wild to think about.
And because it can see all the variables at once, it synthesizes the noise. It spots those invisible threads tying them together. It finds the pattern that says, when X happens over here in biology, Y happens over there in chemistry.
And we just miss it.
We miss it because we simply cannot hold X and Y in our heads at the same time, especially when they are buried under literal mountains of irrelevant data.
And I want you, the listener, to just think about the sheer volume of information you are bombarded with every single day. I mean, we live in an era of absolute information overload.
Okay, without a doubt.
We are drowning in data, but we are starving for actual wisdom. And what's happening in the scientific community is that the bottleneck of human knowledge is no longer our ability to collect data.
Right, the collection part is easy now.
We have like orbital telescopes mapping distant galaxies, environmental sensors on every continent, genetic sequencers running 24/7. The data collection is largely automated.
We have more data than we know what to do with.
Exactly. The computational bottleneck has always been our biological limit to actually process it all. So AI is stepping in to do the heavy lifting of synthesizing that noise, which fundamentally changes the friction of discovery.
Yeah, completely removes the friction.
It's like we've been trying to drink from a fire hose, right? And AI has finally built a reservoir and a filtration system so we can actually, use the water.
I love that analogy. And that transition from merely collecting data to instantly synthesizing it,
Right.
that is where the real magic happens.
Yeah.
It moves science from a reactive state to a predictive state.
Meaning we don't have to wait around to get lucky.
Right. We stop waiting to stumble upon answers and start mathematically generating them.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we are suddenly living in a world of predictive design where the machine is bypassing decades of human trial and error, it forces a really critical examination of how this applies to the real world.
Absolutely.
Because abstract math is one thing, right? But the source points out that the biggest impact of this technology so far is in drug discovery, protein folding, and faster scientific research. And I want to push back on this just a little bit.
Sure.
AI is, at the end of the day, a computer program. It is silicon, electricity, and lines of code. And we all know proteins do the heavy lifting in our biology, but how on earth is a computer program directly impacting flesh and blood issues? Like, why is the code so obsessed with proteins?
That is a vital question because it does sound like a disconnect, right? Code versus flesh.
Yeah, exactly.
To understand why AI is reshaping flesh and blood biology, we really have to look at the computational nightmare that proteins represent. Like you mentioned, proteins do the heavy lifting in biology. They fight infections, they digest our food, they carry oxygen.
Right, they're the building blocks.
But computationally, they're a puzzle of almost unimaginable complexity. So a protein starts as this long linear sequence of amino acids, just a string. But in order to actually function, it has to fold itself into a highly specific, complex, three-dimensional shape.
Okay, so the shape is what matters.
The shape determines its function entirely. If it folds correctly, it does its job. If it folds incorrectly, it becomes the root cause of devastating diseases.
So understanding the 3D shape of a protein is like the absolute foundation of understanding a disease, right? And figuring out how to block it with a drug. We need to know what the lock looks like so we can build the chemical key.
Yes, that is the perfect way to look at it. But here is the massive, almost insurmountable computational roadblock we've faced. A linear sequence of amino acids can fold in a practically infinite number of ways.
How infinite are we talking?
The mathematical possibilities are staggering. The number of potential 3D shapes a single average-sized protein could take is greater than the number of atoms in the observable universe.
Wait, let's pause there.
Yeah, greater than the number of atoms in the universe for just one single protein.
Just one, yes. In physics and computer science, this is known as a combinatorial explosion.
Combinatorial explosion.
Yeah, the combinations just explode outward. If you use a traditional supercomputer to try and guess the shape by, calculating every single possible fold, just brute forcing the math one by one, the universe would literally end before the computer finished calculating a single protein.
That is insane.
The math is that vast. And because of this, human scientists had to rely on painstakingly slow experimental work in physical labs.
Right, physically looking at them.
Yeah, using X-rays and electron microscopes, spending years, sometimes decades, and millions of dollars to figure out the shape of just one protein. We had this massive experimental logjam. But wait, okay, if the mathematical possibilities are that vast, how does an AI solve it without taking millions of years? Because if it's just making assumptions based on past data, isn't there a massive risk of it confidently, like hallucinating a protein structure that looks mathematically pretty but would completely fail in a real human body?
See, that is the exact skepticism many scientists had initially. They asked that exact question. But this is where we have to look at how the AI actually operates. It doesn't just guess randomly, and it isn't just hallucinating based on aesthetic patterns.
Okay, so what is it doing?
By analyzing the massive data sets of the few proteins we had successfully mapped out over decades in those physical labs, The AI learned the underlying constraints of physics.
Oh, wow.
It mapped the mathematical relationships and the physical distances between amino acids. It essentially reverse engineered the physical laws of biology.
It learned the rules of the game.
Exactly. It learned why certain amino acids attract each other and why others repel. And because it synthesized the underlying physical rules, it can now look at a brand new, unseen string of amino acids and accurately predict its 3D shape in minutes.
In minutes, that is staggering.
Minutes instead of decades.
So it's not just doing the math faster, it has fundamentally decoded the physical rules governing the biology itself.
Right.
So when the source talks about faster scientific research, it's not just talking about, doing the same old things a little quicker.
Yeah.
It's completely bypassing the longest, most expensive computational roadblock in the entire scientific process.
Bypassing it entirely.
I mean, think about the traditional timeline of medicine. Just think about the decades it takes to develop a single new drug.
Yeah.
The years of blind trial and error, the dead ends, the billions of dollars spent just trying to find a chemical key that fits a microscopic lock we couldn't even clearly see.
It was essentially high-stakes guesswork for a long time.
Yeah. And this is the exact real-world friction that AI is currently removing. We are fast-tracking the entire pipeline of drug discovery.
The implications are boundless, truly. When you eliminate that bottleneck, you can respond to novel pathogens in days instead of years. You can design custom enzymes to eat plastic pollution. You can engineer crops that withstand extreme weather.
It's just endless.
The applications are as diverse as biology itself. All because we gave a pattern recognition engine a problem that was mathematically impossible for a human mind to solve.
Which brings up an incredibly fascinating, maybe almost uncomfortable implication from the source material.
Oh, the philosophical stuff.
Yeah, exactly. If AI is successfully reverse engineering physical laws, if it is bypassing the experimental friction entirely and predicting protein shapes in minutes that would take humans' lifetimes, it forces a really tough philosophical question about credit, achievement, and, well, who or what is actually doing the science.
Right, who gets the glory?
Exactly. The source explicitly raises the possibility of AI winning a Nobel Prize someday. It balances that by saying humans will still guide the innovation, but the fact that Nobel Prize and machine are even in the same sentence is just wild.
It really challenges our ego as a species.
Totally. Let's think about astronomy for a second. If a revolutionary new telescope is built, right, and it's so incredibly powerful that it helps an astronomer discover a brand new habitable planet,
Okay.
we don't give the telescope the Nobel Prize in physics.
Oh, of course not.
We give it to the astronomer who looked through it. So is AI just a very fancy telescope, like a highly sophisticated tool?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Hmm.
that is the defining epistemological debate of our time right there. Are we building a better lens or are we building a second brain?
A second brain. Wow.
And to anchor our conversation back to the source's caveat, because the text says possibly regarding the machine winning the prize, but it explicitly notes that humans will still guide the innovation. Analyzing that dynamic is really critical to understanding the future of research.
Right, the human is still in the loop.
Exactly. The reason we don't give the telescope the Nobel Prize is because the telescope lacks agency. It lacks intent. Right now, as incredibly powerful as AI is at solving combinatorial explosions of data, it fundamentally lacks intrinsic motivation.
I see what you're saying, but I have to challenge that telescope analogy a bit further.
Let's hear it.
If the telescope is pre-programmed to just stare at the sky, sure, it's just a tool. But what if the telescope figures out exactly where to look without the astronomer asking it to?
Okay.
What if it spots an anomaly, adjusts its own lenses, cross-references it with a physics database, and spits out a fully formed thesis on a new exoplanet? Isn't it functioning as the astronomer at that point? Like, is it becoming a co-author of the research?
That is a brilliant pushback. It really is, and it forces us to define what we actually mean by intent. Even if the AI telescope points itself and writes the thesis, why did it do that?
Because of its programming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It did it because a human engineer gave it an optimization function.
Hmm.
It was programmed to seek anomalies. AI has no organic curiosity.
It doesn't care.
Right. It doesn't wake up in the morning and feel an existential drive to understand why the sky is blue, or why a certain cell mutates, or how the universe began. It doesn't have an internal emotional need to understand the world.
It's just crunching the numbers it was told to crunch.
Yes. It has the immense, incomprehensible intelligence required to solve the puzzle, but it absolutely needs a human to decide which puzzle actually matters in the broader context of the human experience.
Right. The AI can map the protein in minutes, but the human scientist has the emotional, social, and intellectual context to say, we need to map this specific protein right now because it's causing a disease that is ravaging my community.
Exactly.
The AI doesn't care if it's mapping a cure for cancer or mapping the structural integrity of a paperclip.
That's the perfect distinction. The AI is completely agnostic to the value of the outcome. The scientific method begins with an observation that leads to a deeply human question. Why did this happen?
The curiosity part.
Right. AI is brilliant at answering the question once it is rigorously defined and aimed at a specific data set. It acts as an oracle. But an oracle is completely useless without a seeker walking up to it and asking the right question.
You need someone to interpret the prophecy.
Exactly. The human element, our intuition, our empathy, our lived experience, our seemingly irrational leaps of logic, that is what formulates the hypothesis. The human guides the innovation by aiming the AI.
So it's still a tool, just an impossibly smart one.
So is it a co-author? Perhaps, in the sense that the discovery literally could not have happened without its specific cognitive architecture. The math was just too vast for us. But the spark of discovery, the initial intent, remains fiercely human.
So what does this all mean? I mean, when we synthesize this incredibly concise but deeply profound source material, the core takeaway seems to be a shift in our own self-perception.
Yeah, how we view ourselves in the universe.
Right. For so long, science fiction has trained us to view the future as man versus machine. A zero-sum game where if the machine gets smarter, the human inevitably becomes less relevant.
The Terminator complex, basically.
Exactly. But what this deep dive into the rise of Nobel Prize machines really reveals is that the future of science isn't man versus machine at all. Rather, it is poised to be powered by a vital, unprecedented partnership.
The symbiosis.
A true symbiosis between human curiosity and AI intelligence. We are the compass and AI is the engine. We decide where we want to go based on our human needs, and the AI figures out how to navigate through the impossibly dense jungle of data to actually get us there.
This raises an important question, though. A final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you step away from this discussion. We've established that the current paradigm relies on humans for curiosity and AI for intelligence.
Right.
The human asks the question, the AI synthesizes the noise and finds the pattern. But what happens if or when AI systems become capable of generating their own original hypotheses?
Oh, wow.
If an AI analyzes all the world's scientific data, starts spotting invisible gaps in our knowledge that we didn't even know existed, and then independently formulates a question to fill that gap.
Just bypassing us entirely on the front end.
Will human curiosity become obsolete in the scientific method? Or will our curiosity just evolve into something else entirely? Will our role shift from asking questions about the universe to asking questions about the minds we've created to understand it?
That is a staggering thought, because if we reach that point, then that romantic image of scientific discovery, the lone genius burning the midnight oil, just waiting for a eureka moment, it doesn't necessarily disappear. The genius isn't replaced.
It just changes form.
Yeah, maybe the midnight oil is burned by a machine, reverse engineering the physical laws of the universe, and the eureka moment, well, maybe that becomes something we share across the boundary of biology and silicon.
This was another episode of AI 10X brought to you by 10 Leaves.